The flaw in a suit tailored to perfection, Clark Halt frequently mused, was the universal assumption that the man within it shared its qualities, smooth, civilized, and just as easily creased. He'd built a career on that assumption. A great number of aliens were about to die because of it. He occupied a corner of the Grand Observation Lounge aboard the diplomatic frigate Covenant's Quill, a silent pillar of curated ennui and dark surge. To the untrained eye, he was a minor attaché, a glorified note-taker whose most demanding duty was to ensure the ambassador's water carafe remained 2/3 full of chilled Aldebaran spring water. The microfiber weave of his suit drank the soft simulated sunlight, its lines sharp enough to cut glass. The atmosphere was a carefully managed cocktail of recycled air scrubbed clean to a faint metallic tang, and the unfamiliar, fragrant steam of Ambassador Reagan's ceremonial Urkreshi tea, which smelled of cardamom and mold. His posture was a study in calculated relaxation, but his gaze was a restless predator. It catalogued, assessed, and discarded. 3 exits, 2 were viable. The third was a tastefully decorated abattoir. The leaded glass decanter on the bar could, in a pinch, shatter a kneecap. The hefty data slate on the conference table might stop a single plasma bolt, though it would be its final act of service. Ambassador Audra Reagan was rehearsing her opening remarks, her voice a finely tuned instrument of galactic policy.
The Human Federation approaches the Amaphor Collective as partners with a shared vision for the future. Our common principles of open commerce and mutual defense provide a foundation upon which a new epoch of prosperity can be constructed.
Clark had heard this version 8 times. He didn't get paid for rhetorical analysis. He got paid to be the physical counter-argument to the things rhetoric couldn't solve. Parsecs away, across a gulf of silent, star-dusted blackness, Victor Null, autarch of the hegemon of Scorn, observed the same scene. A cloaked drone fed a live image to the primary holotank on the bridge of his command ship, the Null Vector. Null, a being of serpentine grace and burnished bioluminescent skin that swirled with patterns of contempt, swiped a 4-fingered hand across a secondary display. Human physiological data scrolled past. Bone density metrics, average muscle-to-mass ratios, susceptibility to rapid G-force transitions. He made a sound, a dry, rasping exhalation that was the Scorn equivalent of a scoff. "Observe them, Corvella," he said to his second-in-command. Corvella, a tetrabrach brute whose face resembled a geological survey of a dead moon, stood with her lower set of arms folded across her dense chest, while her upper 2 performed a complex meditative knot-tying exercise with a cord of woven silver. "Their biology is a farce. Their skeletons are porous, like a child's toy. They dispatch diplomats and functionaries to perform a warrior's task." He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist at the holotank, his clawed finger tapping the image of Clark. "They even swaddle their sentinels in ceremonial fabric. They propose treaties where we demand tribute. Their entire philosophy is a contagion that weakens the warrior's spirit." Corvella's lower arms unfolded. Her upper hands completed their knot in a final perfect twist.
"A lesson will be delivered, autarch."
"A definitive one," Null purred, his eyes glowing with a faint internal malice. "Let the galaxy witness the consequence when these soft, ephemeral newcomers overreach. Commence the culling." The first indication of trouble was a momentary flicker of the lounge's lighting. The second was a proximity alert that shrieked before being abruptly silenced. The third was the universe attempting to fold the ship in half. Plasma lances from decloaked Scorn-sworn Strikecraft punched into the Covenant's Quill's engine block, disabling it with an efficiency that bordered on boredom. The inertial dampeners whined, buckled, and failed. The frigate bucked like a spurred beast, flinging the diplomatic staff across the lounge as if they were discarded dolls. Ambassador Reagan cried out, a sharp, angry sound as she was thrown hard against a bulkhead. Clark remained rooted. His center of gravity dropped, his bespoke leather shoes gripping the deck plating. He became a fixed point in a sudden, violent cascade of chaos. His mind, a cold engine of tactical calculus, was already processing the attack vectors, the weapon signatures, the time to impact for borders. 25 seconds, maybe less. The deafening shriek of protesting metal confirmed his estimate. Armored boarding pods, needle-nosed and dripping with menace, punctured the hull in 3 separate locations. Red emergency lighting flooded the corridor outside the lounge, casting the scene in a gory, strobing light. The flashes illuminated the sharp green crackle of plasma discharges and the wet terminal gasps of the ship's small security detail. They were competent soldiers, armed with standard-issue pulse carbines against the galaxy's most ruthless fanatics. They brought a well-reasoned argument to a knife fight. The lounge doors hissed open, then were blasted from their magnetic clamps with a deafening concussion. Sworn commandos, encased in ash-gray combat armor etched with sigils of contempt, poured into the room. They moved with the fluid lethality of pack hunters, their plasma rifles carving the space into disciplined fields of fire. The lead commando, his helmet a skull-faced effigy of polished non-reflective black, surveyed the tableau. Terrified attachés cowering behind overturned furniture, a defiant Ambassador Reagan pushing herself to her feet, and a single man standing calmly in a business suit. The commando's helmet speaker crackled, a metallic rasp laced with condescension.
Your treaty is rescinded. On behalf of the hegemony of Scorn, I am here to receive your unconditional submission.
Clark was in motion before the final syllable of submission had finished echoing through the ruined lounge. There was no wasted effort, no preamble. One moment his hands were empty at his sides, the next his sidearm was in his fist. It lacked the elegant lines of an energy weapon. It was a dense block of functionality, a kinetic pistol built for one purpose, punching holes through things that preferred to remain unholed. He called it the shield popper, a custom piece that fired dense-core tungsten carbide penetrator rounds at hypersonic velocity. The pistol barked twice. The sound was a physical blow to the eardrums, 2 hard, visceral cracks that spoke of chemical propellants and the unforgiving laws of physics. The 2 sworn commandos flanking their leader had personal energy shields that rippled with protective force. These fields were engineered to disperse plasma bolts and laser fire. They did nothing to halt a solid slug of metal moving at 7 times the speed of sound. The rounds punctured through the shields as if they were soap bubbles, tore through the high-tech composite armor, and turned the flesh and bone behind them into a superheated aerosol. 2 of the galaxy's most feared zealots collapsed to the deck, their advanced systems utterly negated by a principle of violence their distant ancestors had likely discovered by throwing rocks with enthusiasm. The remaining commandos froze for a fatal logic error of half a second. What just happened? In that sliver of time, Clark was already moving. He shoved a heavy, ornate desk forward, its grav plates shrieking on the floor, creating a mobile wall of cover. He vaulted over it as a storm of green plasma turned the antique wood into a puddle of molten slag. He landed in a crouch, his left hand snatching a heavy glass data slate from a console. He hurled it like a discus. The attack was crude, unexpected. An alien brain, conditioned for energy weapons and tactical firefights, registered a piece of office equipment spinning through the air and flinched. The lead commando instinctively raised a gauntlet to deflect it. That was the only invitation Clark needed. He covered the 20 feet between them in a blur of dark fabric. A 9-inch blade of matte black carbon fiber materialized in his hand, deployed from a magnetic sheath strapped to his ankle and hidden by the cuff of his trousers. He didn't aim for a killing blow. Those were inefficient. He drove the knife into the power conduit running along the outside of the commando's plasma rifle, severing it in a shower of blue sparks. In the same fluid motion, he hooked his arm around the alien's neck, spun him around, and adopted the heavily armored commando as a living shield. The remaining squad paused, their rifles wavering, unable to get a clear trajectory on the human who was now wearing their leader like a cheap coat.
Drop your weapons!
The captured leader gurgled, a command born of pure panic. They were professionals, but their fanaticism outweighed their professionalism. They opened fire. Plasma bolts sizzled past Clark, impacting the back of their screaming commander. Clark was untroubled. The armor absorbed the thermal energy. He discarded his failing shield, shoving the smoldering Scorn into his comrades. As they stumbled, he went to work. A steel fountain pen with a reinforced iridium nib, plucked from an inside pocket, found the soft, unarmored tissue of a throat just below a helmet seal. He whipped his suit jacket off, a single sharp motion, and threw it over the head of another commando, blinding him. Before the alien could process this, a polished Oxford shoe, its toe secretly reinforced with a steel cap, shattered its knee joint with a sound like a branch snapping in a hard frost. The disarmed leader, still fumbling for a sidearm, was neutralized with a two-fingered strike to a nerve cluster at the base of his neck. The commando went down like a sack of wet cement. The engagement lasted 22 seconds. The once pristine lounge was a disaster zone, littered with the still smoking bodies of the Sworn's finest. Their sleek armor was punctured, their advanced weapons useless. They had arrived prepared for a tactical engagement with an inferior species. They had blundered into a blender. A heavy stillness settled over the room, broken only by the crackle of a burning console and the distant, percussive groan of the dying frigate. Ambassador Reagan and her surviving staff stared, their faces a canvas of horror, shock, and stunned disbelief. The quiet man, the professional wallflower who had spent the entire voyage fading into the background, now stood calmly amidst the carnage. Clark ejected the spent magazine from his shield popper. It clattered to the floor. He smoothly inserted a fresh one, the click of it seating home unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. A small, bright green splash of sworn blood marred his left cufflink. It was an offense against good order. He gave his weapon a quick inspection, then holstered it in the custom rig hidden beneath his jacket. His only other action was to reach up and meticulously, deliberately straighten his tie. The simple gesture, the immediate return to pristine professionalism in the middle of a slaughterhouse, was somehow more chilling than all the violence that had preceded it. Ambassador Reagan finally found her voice. It was ragged, her diplomatic composure having been violently disassembled.
Halt! What are you?
Clark turned to her, his expression as unreadable as a redacted document. Your security detail, Madam Ambassador, he said, his voice level. The immediate threat is neutralized. Aboard the Null Vector, Victor Null watched the helmet cam feed from his lead commando dissolve into a blur of dark fabric, a deafening gunshot, and then static. Report! He snarled into the command channel. Cunning Team Alpha, report! The channel returned only silence. Team Bravo, status! The only reply was a panicked, open-channel transmission from a second boarding party, pulling back from another section of the ship. The sworn soldier was hyperventilating, the sound of plasma fire echoing behind him.
Fall back! All teams withdraw! Sector Gamma is a charnel house! It's a single combatant! One man! He's a void demon in tailored cloth!
The transmission cut out, replaced by the empty hiss of deep space. Victor Null stared at the static-filled screen. His arrogance, the bedrock of his power, crumbled into a fine dust of disbelief. The disbelief hardened, second by second, into a cold, personal fury he hadn't felt since he was a whelp in the training creches. The phrase echoed on his immaculate command bridge, an unwelcome, unbelievable phantom. A void demon in tailored cloth. The crippled Covenant's quill limped to Portent, a neutral station built inside the fossilized skull of a creature so vast it had once mistaken nebulae for plankton. Portent was a labyrinth of bone and chrome, a place where fortunes were made, lives were lost, and the rule of law was a commodity traded on the open market. It was the perfect place to either vanish completely or have your throat slit for the lint in your pocket. In the ship's medbay, Clark worked on a captured Sworn, the one he'd neutralized with the nerve strike. The alien was defiant, spitting curses in a language that sounded like grinding glass. Clark had no interest in motives or battle plans. He didn't care who had hired the hegemony of Scorn. He cared about operational intelligence. I need the frequency for your hegemony's operational comms channel, Clark said, his voice calm. He held a med scanner, its diagnostic light playing over the alien's paralyzed form. The Scorn spat a glob of green fluid that hissed on the deck.
Die, soft flesh!
Clark sighed. He adjusted a setting on the scanner, changing its beam from diagnostic to a low-power surgical laser. Your species possesses a secondary brachial nerve located here, he said, pointing the beam at a spot just below the alien's armpit. Severing it will result in permanent motor function loss in this limb. My hand might slip during the procedure. The alien's eyes widened. 5 seconds of silent, brutal persuasion later, Clark had the frequency. He left the Sworn to contemplate its future and accessed the channel on a secured datapad. He found it quickly. A Priority 1 broadcast from Victor Null himself was playing on a loop to every active bounty hunter guild and mercenary outfit in the sector. Null's furious, copper-skinned face dominated the screen.
The contract on the human diplomatic mission is amended,
Null snarled.
The bounty is quadrupled, but a new clause is added.
A holographic image materialized next to Null's head, a grainy, stabilized shot from his commando's helmet cam, showing a man in a dark suit, his face obscured, moving with extreme speed.
A personal bonus, a king's ransom, for the head of this unidentified human operative. The hegemony of Scorn has been dishonored. This has transcended business. This is a matter of creed.
Clark watched the message, his expression unchanged. He had just become the most valuable and most hunted target on Portent. Excellent. It clarified the mission parameters. In a secure diplomatic suite inside one of Portent's massive fossilized eye sockets, the air was thick enough to chew. The suite was opulent, paid for by the diplomatic corps, but it felt like a gilded cage.
We must fortify our position,
one of the junior attachés stammered, his face pale.
Barricade the doors! Demand assistance from station security!
Ambassador Reagan, her composure now reforged into something sharp and dangerous, shook her head.
Portent Security is a private enterprise. They'll sell us to the highest bidder. We need to await the arrival of the Human Federation fleet.
The fleet is 3 weeks away, best case, Clark said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. He stood by the suite's armored viewport, gazing down at the chaotic, multi-leveled city sprawling within the dead god's cranium. They are hunting us. Fortifying a position only tells them where we are. Hiding is a slow-motion execution. Reagan turned to him, her eyes locking onto his. The fear was gone, replaced by a steely resolve.
What is your recommendation, Halt?
Clark turned from the viewport. They've declared a hunt. They assume we're the quarry. They are mistaken. He paused, letting his words hang in the room. Survival depends on going on the offensive. We must make them fear us more than they desire the bounty. We are not the quarry in a trap, Madam Ambassador. We are the bait, and I'm about to set it. He gave her a curt nod. I'm going shopping. While Clark melted into the station's sprawling, neon-drenched underbelly, Ambassador Reagan fought her own battle. It arrived as 2 towering tetrabrachs from Portent Security, their exoskeletons the color of gunmetal, their expressions grim. Ambassador Reagan, the lead guard rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. We have questions regarding the heavily damaged diplomatic frigate in Docking Orbit 7, the one with multiple deceased members of the hegemony of Scorn aboard. They were suspicious, unimpressed by her title. Here, in the lawless heart of the galaxy, diplomacy was the formal prelude to violence. Reagan, however, was in her element. She flashed them a smile of polished ice and offered them seats they were too large to take.
Of course, Chief,
she began, her tone one of profound disappointment.
I was just composing a formal grievance regarding the station's abysmal security measures. For Sworn's death squad to operate with such impunity within your jurisdiction, it's frankly astonishing. It calls into question the very viability of Portent as a neutral port of call.
The guards shifted, their antennae twitching.
Furthermore,
she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, legalistic edge,
Under Clause 19, subsection Gamma of the Pan-Galactic Diplomatic Immunity Accords, any investigation into an incident involving a credentialed diplomatic envoy must be coordinated by a representative from the envoy's home government. I see your human co-chair is absent. An unfortunate oversight, I'm sure.
She spoke for 10 uninterrupted minutes, a dizzying, masterful performance of bureaucratic warfare. She invoked treaties that might or might not have existed, quoted regulations she was inventing on the spot, and subtly implied that the mountain of paperwork a formal complaint from the burgeoning Human Federation would generate would mire the station's administration in legal sludge for the next 5 years. She yielded no ground. She answered none of their questions. Instead, she buried them under an avalanche of her own. They left confused, frustrated, and with a distinct feeling that they were the ones in trouble. Reagan had bought Clark precious time, not with a weapon, but with a thesaurus and a will of iron. Portent was a vertical city of jaw-dropping chaos, 1,000 different species stacked atop one another, where atmospheric condensers dripped perpetual rain that caught the glare of holographic advertisements, promising everything from genetic resequencing to pan-galactic noodles. The endless hiss of the rain mixed with the sizzle of street vendors' grills and a dozen alien languages overlapping into a chaotic murmur. Clark moved through it like a phantom. His simple, dark suit should have been a beacon amidst the garishly armored mercenaries and extravagantly robed aliens. Instead, it was an anomaly so profound it became camouflage. People looked for armor, for visible weapons, for predatory posture. Clark displayed none of that. He just looked like a man who had made a catastrophic navigational error. He was listening. He gathered whispers from information brokers in smoke-filled cantinas, tracked the digital footprints of bounty hunter crews logged into the local guild network, and cross-referenced their movements with station schematics. Null's bounty had kicked the hornet's nest. The station crawled with hunters, all eager for a piece of the man in the suit. They cornered him in a narrow, grimy maintenance alleyway, the air thick with the scent of overheated circuits and recycled water. A full squad, a Goliath of basalt, a silicon-based brute whose fists were the size of small asteroids, 2 swift skitterman skirmishers with wickedly curved blades, and a reptilian sniper watching from a gantry above.
"Nowhere to run, suit,"
the Goliath growled, his voice a low, seismic rumble. Clark drew his shield popper. He fired once. The hypersonic round caught one of the skittermans mid-lunge and slammed it into the far wall with enough force to leave a crater. He pivoted, aiming for the Goliath, but when he squeezed the trigger, the pistol just clicked on an empty chamber, the slide locking back with a final metallic sigh. The last 3 magazines had been spent clearing sworn welcoming parties in the lower conduits. This was his last. His motion was seamless. The failed shot flowed into ejecting the empty magazine, which he then hurled at the Goliath's face. The massive creature flinched, batting the small piece of metal away, but the split second of distraction was all Clark needed. His hand shot out and grabbed a discarded shock maul from the body of a fallen station enforcer, a casualty of some earlier, unrelated piece of Portent business. The fight was a brutal ballet of desperation and physics. The remaining skitterman lunged, its blades a silver blur. Clark used the maul's shaft to parry, the impact jarring his arm, then slammed the electrified head into the alien's chest. The skitterman convulsed and dropped. The sniper fired a searing red bolt that gouged a molten channel in the wall where Clark's head had been a moment before. Clark ducked behind a pile of refuse as the Goliath charged in. The alien swung a fist aimed to pulp him. Clark didn't try to block. He ducked under the swing and drove the shock maul's handle into the Goliath's kneecap. Silicon crunched. The giant roared, staggering, and Clark went to work. He slammed the maul's head into the Goliath's plasma pistol, shorting it out with a crackle of energy. As the Goliath reeled, Clark executed a perfect joint lock on the alien's arm, forcing it to its knees with a scream of pain. In the same fluid, almost invisible motion, his other hand deftly unclipped a secure datapad from the hunter's belt. The move was so integrated into the takedown, so utterly secondary to the act of disabling his opponent, that it barely registered as a separate action. He left them groaning and broken in the alley. A message had to be sent. Killing them was just business. Leaving them alive to tell the story of their disarmament by an unarmed man in a suit, that was marketing. His suit, however, now bore a long, ugly tear along the trouser leg. He frowned. Unprofessional. The encrypted datapad was his key. Clark sliced through the shoddy bounty hunter-grade security in minutes, tracing their payment source to its handler, a sworn lieutenant holed up in a high-end penthouse suite in the station spire. Clark's infiltration was silent, utilizing a maintenance shaft and a service elevator. The lieutenant, a wiry sworn with nervous shifting eyes, remained oblivious until the door to his balcony slid open and Clark stepped inside, dripping rain onto the pristine white carpet. The interrogation was about leverage, not pain. Pain made people lie. Clark learned of Null's primary base, an asteroid fortress carved into a spinning rock known as the Shard. He got fleet dispositions, security schedules, and patrol routes. But he pushed further. "Reputation is everything to Null," Clark said, his voice a low monotone. "He broadcasts his victories. How does he validate his contracts to the Mercenary Guild? There must be a secure, verified system." The terrified lieutenant, pinned to his own expensive chair with the threat of a 600-story drop, began to sweat. He revealed the existence of a guild-certified command console. It was a secure, encrypted comms unit installed on all high-level hegemony ships and bases. It was used for one thing: broadcasting irrefutable proof of a completed contract directly to the Mercenary Guild central servers. It was the bedrock of their reputation. Clark now had a target far more valuable than Victor Null himself. He had a target that could destroy the hegemony of Scorn without him having to fire another shot after tonight. He returned to Reagan's suite, a ghost slipping out of the penthouse as quietly as he had arrived. He was bruised, and a fresh splash of alien grime now adorned his cufflink. As he delivered his terse report, Reagan wordlessly retrieved a sterile med pack from a diplomatic first aid kit. She didn't ask what happened. She just placed it on the table beside him. Clark gave a single brief nod of acknowledgement, applied it to a cut on his hand, and continued his briefing. The relationship had shifted. They were co-conspirators now. "I'm going to the Shard," Clark stated, laying a schematic of the asteroid base on the table. "And I need a ship." Reagan didn't hesitate. She accessed her secure accounts.
The Diplomatic Corps provides discretionary emergency funds for first contact scenarios,
she explained, a wry smile touching her lips.
Unvouchered operational assets. I believe this qualifies.
They descended into Portent's lowest levels, a grimy, chaotic maze of shipyards and chop shops. The air was thick with the smells of hot metal, caustic solvents, and desperation. They found their contact in a workshop cluttered with alien engine parts, a biomechanical being named Glitch, whose 4 multi-jointed metallic arms worked independently on 3 different projects at once. Reagan, shedding her diplomatic polish, began to haggle. It was a master class in hard-nosed negotiation. She argued over fuel efficiency, sensor masking, and aftermarket weapon mounts. Glitch, a notorious swindler, found himself outmaneuvered and cornered. He developed a grudging respect for the human woman in the pristine travel suit. They didn't just buy a decommissioned, sworn fighter, a rust bucket that looked like it had lost a fight with an asteroid field. For an exorbitant extra fee, Reagan secured Glitch's personal services for 1 work cycle. Glitch spat a stream of lubricant into a nearby drain.
"You get me for 10 hours,
he warbled, his voice a synthesized rasp.
"The best off-the-books mechanic on Portent. You want a ship that flies, or a ship that fights?"
Clark looked at the freighter, then at Glitch. "Neither," he said. "I want a bomb with a cockpit." In a secluded hangar bay that Glitch rented with Reagan's credits, the plan took shape. The place reeked of ozone and hot metal. Clark was the architect of destruction. Glitch, the sullen but masterful engineer, was his instrument. "Strip out the cargo stabilizers and the inertial dampeners," Clark commanded. Glitch's optical sensors all focused on him.
"It will fly apart if you attempt to turn."
"It's only making one," Clark replied. "Reroute all auxiliary power to the primary drive core. Everything. Life support, secondary weapons, shields. I want it all feeding the engines. Glitch's manipulator pincers clicked in what might have been a grin.
You are building a kinetic missile.
Using plasma cutters that screamed like dying animals, he made it happen. The freighter's guts were ripped out, its systems rewired into a configuration that defied every safety regulation. For the final piece, Clark unpacked a field emergency insertion kit he'd acquired from one of Glitch's contacts. It was a self-contained single-person ejection pod, armored like a miniature dreadnought. With Glitch's help, they bolted it into the bulkhead behind the pilot's seat. Glitch wiped grease from his brow with a cleaning appendage.
This is madness. You are going to get yourself killed.
No, Clark corrected him, checking the pod seals. I'm planning a violent and survivable insertion. Suicide was for amateurs. Using the stolen lieutenant's codes, the battered Scorn-Sworn fighter approached the shard. It broadcast the proper identification, squawking its credentials like a lost goose. Inside his opulent command center, Victor Null watched the ships approach. A cruel, confident smirk played on his lips.
So,
He mused to his tactical officer.
the little human found one of our old birds. He thinks he can sneak in wearing our colors?
He laughed.
Let him get closer. Scramble a welcoming party. I want him taken alive. I want to look him in the eye as I pull his fragile body apart.
As a squadron of sleek Scorn-Sworn fighters scrambled, Clark didn't evade. He pushed the throttle forward, accelerating directly towards the station's primary command spire. Alarms screamed. The freighter's frame groaned. His timing had to be perfect. 2 seconds before the calculated impact, as the station's point defense cannons painted his ship with targeting lasers, he slammed the large red activation switch. With a bone-jarring kick, the pod fired laterally, an angled shot away from the freighter's terminal path. A moment later, the freighter hit. The overcharged drive core went critical, unleashing a massive, silent plasma explosion. The shockwave hit the pod like a giant's fist, but its angle of ejection saved it. Shielded by expanding vapor and a massive EMP, the station's remaining defenses were blind. The pod, an unseen piece of shrapnel in a storm of shrapnel, smashed through the weakened blast doors of a secondary hangar bay. It skidded across the deck in a shower of sparks and screeching metal. The hatch blew open. Clark emerged from the wreckage. He was bruised, battered, but he was inside, and he had brought hell with him. The shard was in chaos. Klaxons blared, lights flickered, and panicked Scorn-Sworn ran through the corridors. Clark moved through the burning hallways like a phantom. Fire, confusion, and fear were his allies. He waged a one-man guerrilla war. He took out communications relays and sabotaged power conduits. He found his path to the auxiliary command center blocked by a heavy pressure door, its frame warped. A dead Scorn-Sworn fire team lay nearby, their plasma welders discarded. They had tried to seal the door. Their high-tech solution had failed against bent metal. In a nearby emergency locker, Clark found a heavy steel pry bar. Where the tech-reliant Scorn-Sworn saw an impossible obstacle, he saw a problem of leverage. He wedged the tip into the seam. He put his entire body weight into it, his muscles straining. With a groan of tortured metal, the door wrenched open just enough for him to squeeze through. He was the low-tech solution to their high-tech problem. Clark kicked open the door to the auxiliary command center. Victor Null was there, surrounded by the sparks of dying consoles. The Scorn-Sworn leader, clad in gleaming personalized combat armor, turned. His eyes burned with disbelief and pure hatred. He ignited a long, crackling energy scythe.
You have ruined my life's work, human! He roared. My reputation! My hegemony! I will take your skull back to my homeworld!
The duel was a clash of philosophies. Null was a master of formal, elegant martial arts. His movements were sweeping arcs and deadly flourishes. Clark was a survivor. He fought dirty. As Null lunged, scythe held high, Clark ripped a twisted metal plate from a console and used it as a crude shield. The energy blade hissed against it. The impact nearly tore his arm from its socket, but it held. Null snarled.
Brute force, the tool of savages!
Clark ignored him, kicking dust and sparks from the floor into Null's face. He used the environment, weaving between consoles, forcing Null's elegant style into the clumsy, confined space. The fight ended with brutal pragmatism. Seeing an opening, Clark charged forward, deliberately taking a searing blow from the scythe across his shoulder. The pain was blinding, but it got him inside Null's guard. With his free hand, he grabbed the haft of the scythe. For a moment, they were locked together. He could see the shock in Null's eyes. No one ever closed with the scythe. He used the alien's surprise, twisted the weapon with all his strength, and ended the confrontation. Breathing heavily, his shoulder on fire, Clark stumbled toward the main command console. He found it in an armored housing, the Guild-certified command console. It was still powered. He activated it. His own bruised, bloody, and soot-stained face filled the screen. He attached the helmet cam footage from the dead commando on the quill, the alleyway beatdown, and the final moments of his duel with Null. Irrefutable, Guild-verified proof. His voice was a low, chilling growl that cut across the Mercenary Guild's secure galaxy-wide network. To the hegemony of Scorn, and all who fly their banner, this is Clark Holt of the Human Federation Diplomatic Corps. Your leader, Victor Null, is dead. Your fortress is broken. He let that sink in. You came for humans, mistaking us for prey, a soft target for an easy contract. You were wrong. This is your only warning. Consider all contracts against human assets null and void. Your reputation is ash. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes cold and hard. Try again, if you desire extinction. He cut the feed, leaving the entire mercenary community of the galaxy staring at a blank screen. Clark commandeered a sworn fighter and slipped back to Portent. He and Reagan were now at the center of a massive station-wide security incident. Before Portent security could lock down their suite, Reagan requested a formal meeting. In the sterile security office, she presented a masterclass in political judo. She laid out a perfectly fabricated report, complete with corrupted data logs and evidence Clark had planted on the sworn lieutenant's computer. She framed the entire incident as a violent internal hegemony power struggle that had tragically victimized the poor, innocent human delegation. Halt's actions, she argued, were a desperate, heroic act of self-defense against a rogue faction that had violated Portent's neutrality. She turned his one-man rampage into a political victory, earning a formal apology from the station administration. She secured their clean exit, leaving Portent to clean up the mess of a ruined asteroid base and a shattered mercenary syndicate. Clark and Ambassador Reagan stood in the departure lounge. Clark's suit was a ruin. The perfect lines were gone, replaced by tears, scorch marks, and faded stains. A relic. Reagan looked at him, a new understanding in her eyes. The quiet man in the corner was gone forever.
I just received a priority communique, she said quietly. The Amaphor Collective has requested an immediate, unconditional signing of the treaty. They're also offering us preferential trade status and a joint defense initiative. It seems your counter-negotiation was spectacularly effective.
Clark looked down at his ruined suit. His only response was a small gesture. He found a tiny piece of shrapnel embedded in his lapel and carefully picked it out before smoothing the tattered fabric. He then stood at parade rest, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the crowds. A silent guardian once more, the perfect fusion of a diplomat's bodyguard and the galaxy's newest, most terrifying legend. Months later, in a grimy bar on the far side of the galaxy, a hulking Gorgon bounty hunter with a face like a bag of smashed crabs was looking at a holographic contract board. He pointed a thick, clawed finger at a high-value target.
That one,
he grunted to his partner.
The human industrialist near the Whispering Chasm of Glace 581. Looks like easy money.
His partner, a wiry skitterman with twitching whiskers, shifted his weight.
No way! We're not taking that!
The Gorgon scoffed.
Why not? They're soft, fragile. I've seen the biological data.
The skitterman leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper that carried through the suddenly quiet bar.
Because no contract on a human is easy money anymore. Haven't you heard the story about the Covenant's quill? About the hegemony of scorn?
He glanced around as if the shadows might be listening.
They say Victor Null himself and his entire fortress were taken down by one man. Just one. They say the lucky ones were the ones who only got their knees broken in an alley. They say they met death, and he was wearing a suit.
Around the bar, other mercenaries went quiet, a new and chilling respect in their eyes. The Gorgon slowly pulled his finger back from the contract. Humanity's reputation had been forged, not in a treaty room with ink and paper, but in the void, with blood and tailored fabric.